Hello, everyone. Just for your info, my background is ATC and for a very long time. So hopefully I can answer your questions. Those that I can't answer straight away, I'll definitely endeavour to get back to you on them. So just an update on the operations at Brisbane Airport and some of the changes to the CTA steps surrounding it that are as an outcome of the opening of the new parallel runway at Brisbane. So starting off with the airport itself, stop bars commenced operations at Brisbane on the current runway on the 11th of March this year. You can see the list of taxiways there, but it's effectively every intersection with the runway, except for one fire road, which you wouldn't be using anyway. And requirements of stop bars are that you not only have a clearance to enter the runway, but the stop bars are down prior to you commencing moving towards the runway at the time. For information, if you're operating in Brisbane at the moment, the stop bars are NOTAM'd out of service for 2 weeks, and the reason for that is for a software upgrade on the equipment being managed by BAC at this time. Okay, the new runway will also have stop bars, of course. So what's happening on May 21? There will be a new charts with changes to the CTA steps, and in particular impacting operators at Archerfield is the lowering of CTA surrounding Archerfield to facilitate finals traffic into the Brisbane NPR. New frequencies and operations for the Brisbane approach and departures cell and the tower, and I'll give you some of those in a little bit in the slides. There's those frequencies are published in IRSA for May 21, and new SIDS and stars to both runways, not just the new runway. Those SIDS and stars are designed to operate in a strategic manner between each other. However, not all SIDS and stars are deconflicted, and air traffic control will manage those that aren't. And in the update in August for IRSA, we'll be publishing the frequency for the ILSTM in the new runway and the Brisbane monitor frequency. Brisbane monitor, the RTF call sign for that is finals, and that's the role that monitors the aircraft on approaches to the parallel runways to touchdown effectively. The main role of the monitor is to protect the two aircraft on final by issuing breakout instructions to an aircraft where there's a possibility one of the two aircraft is entering what's called the no transgression zone, which is the zone in between the two runways. There are operations on the current runway from May 21 until NPR opening that are slightly different to today, mostly around the design of the new SIDS and stars from and to that runway, and the new airspace, of course. Current new runway opening date is 12th of July 2020, and on that day we'll go to full modes of operation for the new runway. Thanks. And so probably some more important of the CTA step changes for operators, local operators, around the Bald Hills mast, a bit of simplification to the CTA steps there to reduce the likelihood of an aeroplane entering CTA without a clearance. You can see there that the step at Bald Hills now 1,500 feet prior to the zone boundary, and if you're operating from Brisbane outbound, one of those VFR waypoints will be a clearance to the Bald Hills mast, particularly for helicopter operators. To the southwest and south, this is an important change for Archerfield operators or anyone operating into and out of Archerfield. The CTA step has been lowered from 3,500 feet to 2,500 feet. The reason for that is to facilitate CTA protection for aircraft on final for the new runway. This is a change that you'll need to be aware of, that clearances will be required earlier if you're climbing from Archerfield when the tower is not open, and also if you're inbound from the south and west. The Amberley boundary hasn't changed, and the procedure between Amberley and Brisbane TCU for your departures to the west should be the same as you're following today, other than at some point you may be either at 2,500 feet instead of 3,500 feet outside controlled airspace, or operating with a clearance at 3,500 feet. Oh, sorry, can we go back to the previous slide? Sorry, the other change there is that the Greenbank restricted area, there's a minor change to that as well. So that's one to note in the charts coming in May 21. Thank you. So noise abatement procedures, fairly important for us at Air Services. New noise abatement procedures published on the 21st of May. So they are available in the new version of DAP East and URSA. So preferred runways and hours of operation effectively between the hours of 0600 to 2200 local runway operations will be dependent on weather and traffic complexity. But still preferred runway ops at all times will be sod props, the simultaneous opposite direction runway mode, and that mode will be the normal mode for 2200 to 0600 local for operations there. This will also be reciprocal runway ops, which is where we'll just use the one runway for opposite direction, and that would be a case of maintenance or one of the runways is closed for some reason. Criteria for the simultaneous operation modes are listed in DAP, and they are basically weather dependent, and so it's visibility of 8K, cloud base of not less than 2,500 feet, and a tailwind component of less than or not less than 5 knots, and the runway has to be dry. We can have aircraft confirm that they can take a greater tailwind on request during the hours of 2200 to 0600. That 0600 time changed to 0500 in daylight savings time due to the increased departures between 0500 and 0600 for the traffic heading southbound. NADP requirements, basically NADP will be introduced on the 21st of May. So that's minimum clean speed on departure below 250 knots up to 3,000 feet, and then below 250 knots as per the airspace requirements up to 10,000 feet. Intersection departures are not available overnight, and not available on runway 19 left and right, unless the category of aircraft is appropriate, which is basically turboprop and lighter aircraft. Preferred flight paths, so that's modes of operation in the runways. The runways have a requirement conforming directions. So if you're coming from the north and west or heading to the north and west at Brisbane, when the new parallel runway opens, you'll be departing and arriving off runway 01 left, 19 right. And to the south and east, it's 01 right and 19 left. Reverse thrust, the restrictions for reverse thrust used, again, they're listed in URSA. And overnight, pilots are requested to minimise their use of reverse thrust, but that's jet aircraft only, obviously. Thanks. So what's happening in new parallel runway operations, we'll have this monitor role, the call sign Brisbane Finals. There will be RMP authorised operations and ILS and low side and high side constraints. And effectively what that means is the ILS approaches have a strategic vertical separation design into them until both aircraft are on final. And depending on the weather and where the monitor is operating, that at that point we can go to what's called independent operations, where the two aircraft on finals to the two runways are not separated using normal ATC separation standards, but are being monitored for compliance on maintaining their final approach path. You can see there's a recommendation that the TCAS on your final approach path is operated in resolution advisory mode. That is due to the close proximity of aircraft on final. And that's a part of what the monitor will be looking for. The monitor has a new discrete VHF of 119.25 and the capability to override both the Brisbane Tower and the Brisbane approach frequencies if an aircraft is deviating off track into the airspace in between the two runways. The monitor will provide alerts, advice to say that you might be deviating off track, and then finally, if required, a breakout instruction. The breakout instruction is never issued to the aircraft that's deviating. It's issued to the other aircraft. There's a reason for that, and that's because the other aircraft, the one that is maintaining track, at that point in time, both the pilot, the flight crew, and ATC know what that aircraft is doing, and it's safer to issue it to an aeroplane that has their situation under control, for want of a better way of putting it. The differences from Sydney. In Sydney, they have dual frequencies for that monitor position. So Sydney has two approaches, two directors, and two PRMs in certain weather situations. That's not required for Brisbane because the Sydney runway is only about 1,000 metres apart. It's actually less than that. Whereas Brisbane, the two runways are 2,000 metres apart, and that provides us with enough space to use a single monitor. The airspace of Brisbane is appropriate for that. And the operation's different to Sydney is that they have approach south and approach west. Those two positions can combine, and then the two directors will operate, whereas in Brisbane it's the opposite. The monitor will operate in a single position and the two approaches will operate separated, decombined. And at about 4 miles from touchdown, the monitor hands over to tower, but continues to monitor the two aeroplanes and can issue a breakout instruction over the top of the tower frequency. The monitor can also put speed control in for aircraft on final to maintain spacing between two arriving aircraft on the same runway. Thanks. So big change for local operators and operators of lighter aircraft. 1432 is closed. No TAMD not available at this point in time. And at advice of Brisbane Airport says that runway will never reopen. It's, I believe, got aircraft parked on it at the moment, and they will stay there until they start dismantling some of the equipment on the runway. On May 21, the runway becomes decommissioned. However, in charting, it will appear in the VTC as being available at Brisbane. It's not. That chart will be corrected in November 2020. AIP's up there, H1720, and there's a NOTAM available that refers to that. Lighting and line markings being removed. Effectively, the runway is becoming unusable at this time. So all references to it, approaches, departures, etc. off 1432 are going to be removed from DAP and URSA from the 21st of May, but unfortunately it still appears in DH and on charts, as I've said. We're aware of that, and those that will be managed through AOP SUP and NOTAM. Okay, so how will traffic be processed into and out of Archerfield? Effectively, where required, Archerfield arrivals will be sequenced as part of the Brisbane sequence. So the flow controller into Brisbane will be aware of an arrival into Archerfield. A space will be created in the sequence to allow that arrival to take place. And depending on the departure type out of Archerfield, the same thing will happen. Air traffic controllers will apply the normal separation standards to manage those arrivals and departures until they're clear of the Brisbane sequence. Thanks. Just a note of caution for operators in the Redcliffe area and the Redcliffe danger area. The Redcliffe danger area now has a lateral overlap with the CTA step north of Brisbane, highlighted in yellow in this slide. In that portion of the danger area, you will require a clearance to operate. If you don't wish to seek clearance, you'll need to remain outside of the CTA step there, which you can see at the furthest arc is 2,000 feet, and then closest to Brisbane is 1,000 feet. As of May 21, there are some airspace changes associated with the Sunshine Coast new runway, 1331. That runway is opening in June 2020. Has been an industry update on that one runway and the airspace and the operations there last week, I believe it was. However, you can see a presentation of that information at that if you wish, and email stakeholder engagement on the listed address there for that info if you didn't get it last week at the webinar. Parachuting, and this is particularly at Redcliffe, no changes to parachuting for 21st of May. They're not required until the new parallel runway opens. On the new parallel runway opening date, there will be no parachute operations at Redcliffe, unfortunately just too close to their runway. The operators at Redcliffe are in contact with ATC at this time around future operations for parachuting away from the Redcliffe site. So some VFR routes you can see clear of the CTA steps now. Travelling over and on either side of Moreton Island, north and southbound as required, and clear of the CTA steps redesigned for the finals of the new runway. And that's a further picture of it, just for clarity in the slides. We've zoomed in on them. And you can see down, following Stradbroke Island, remaining clear of CTA, heading towards the Gold Coast and northbound for aerodromes north of Brisbane, such as Caboolture and Sunshine Coast. And for westbound aircraft heading to Archerfield and inbound, the VFR route there is as depicted, and I believe that's not a change. This is important to note. This VFR lanes, the two marked on the current BTC, will be moved at next charting change. VFR aircraft remaining west of the Bruce Highway at below 1,500 feet won't require a clearance. If you're going coastal, you will, and it may not be always available. So May 21 is a fairly significant change for ATC operations. Big changes to airspace design, big changes to arrival and departure paths out of Brisbane. There are different procedures for ATC. So for a period, while ATC what we call consolidate and build their competency, there will be a conservative approach to things such as training flights, survey flights and parachuting. Please be patient with us. We are working hard on training our controllers very well, and we don't expect this transition period to last for a long time. However, the information will become available via NOTAM. The strategy will be reviewed, of course, at all times, and a transition at the time that the new runway opens will also take place, and we may need to put in similar kind of constraints at that time, the runway opening. Now we are, as you can imagine, following what is the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on aviation and the industry in general. So when we do know of any changes, we'll certainly be letting people know. You can imagine we wake up, as everybody does every morning, with new and different information. One to keep an eye out for, and when it's significant enough for us to announce it to people, we'll make the effort to get you all contacted with that new info. So there's a lot of information out about the new flight paths to the new parallel runway. The BAC new runway website has some great information on it and a really good tool where you can type in where you live and you can see the impact of current and new new to be published flight paths. The website listed there, the flight path tool website is that one. And then there's also our own website, which has just a little bit of information about what air services impacts are and what we're doing. Another good port of call is the Knowledge Centre on the BAC website. A lot of questions that have been asked repeatedly and by people in the community are there and are answered. Thanks for that. Hopefully has been some good info for you, and quite happy now to take questions either on notice or we'll answer them if we can straight away. So I guess I'll open the floor.
Questions yet, but hi everyone. I would invite you to ask your questions now, please. Thanks, Richard, for your presentation. If you'd like to use the chat function to submit your questions, now's your chance. Please select to Air Services Customer Engagement, type in your question and press enter, and we'll pass that on to Richard. We really need some thinking music here.
Hi, Richard. It's Brian here. Thank you very much for your presentation. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on the mode, the SOD operations?
Yeah, for sure. So effectively what we would be running is departures off one runway and arrivals on the other as the sort of most efficient subprops mode. And it would be dependent on what sort of planned traffic we had. So, excuse me. So that's arrivals on 19 and departures off 01. So what this does is effectively put all traffic on departure and when they're low on final over the water, reducing the noise impact for the Brisbane community. It's our preferred operating mode, and in light traffic we'll go to it as early as possible. However, the requirement in IRSA will be that from 2200 to 0600 local, that will be the published mode on the ATIS. And so the critical parts of that are the tailwind and that the runway is dry effectively. So we have a regulatory requirement around tailwind. We can accept waivers of that for aircraft that can accept a higher tailwind. It's actually our preference that if an aircraft can accept a higher tailwind that they do. But as is listed in AOP, a pilot can always nominate their required runway for operational reasons.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a couple of other questions coming in for you now. Firstly, Richard, is the actual NPR opening date on the May AIRAC date or some other time?
Okay, yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear with that one. So no, so May AIRAC is a big change for us, and the reason it's running, scheduled this way is because May is the big AIRAC for the first half of the year. So May 21 is the airspace and departures and arrivals changes, the published departures and arrivals changes to Brisbane, and the CTA steps, etc. The planned runway opening date 12th of July 2020, and that's when we go into those parallel runway ops with the various modes like dual parallel ops onto 01, etc.
And the next question, will there be descending breakouts or climb only?
Only climb. So breakouts will be issued at a point where an aircraft can climb. So there's three possible outcomes with a breakout, and one of them is to actually allow the aircraft to continue to land. So there is a point, and it's kind of within about 4 miles, where if an airplane is heading towards the no transgression zone and the other airplane is within about 2 to 4 miles of touchdown, we'd probably just make that airplane continue to a landing rather than issue a breakout instruction. The other options are the published missed approach could be the breakout instruction, and the third option is that it could be a heading assigned by the monitor with a climb instruction.
More questions. Now's your chance. Please ask your questions. Okay, here's one on cue. Will any OCTA missed approach procedures at Redcliffe on runway 07 require CTA clearance with the new lower level 1000 step if maintaining runway heading?
Can I take that one on notice? So if I could get the contact details, I could get an answer to that, within an hour or so, but I couldn't answer for you straight away, sorry.
No problem. We will collect all the questions that you take on notice and we'll distribute them to everyone at the end. So we'll add that one to the list.
Awesome, thanks.
Here's another one. Has the controlled airspace lower level overhead Caboolture lowered to 2500?
Okay, I can answer that one, but just give me 5 secs.
Research is good.
Look, sorry, I will have to take that on notice. I'm having a bit of bandwidth fun. So let me take that one on notice. Thanks, yeah.
No problem, and we will distribute those responses to everyone. More questions? Anyone? Now's your chance. Of course, if you do think of any questions after we finish today, please feel free to send them through to us and we will get the answers for you. Our email address is stakeholder@airservicesaustralia.com. We'll also send you all a copy of the presentation in the next couple of days. We're also making a recording of this webinar, so we will send you a link to that when it comes up. As mentioned during the presentation, we do have a recording of last week's webinar on the Sunshine Coast changes, plus fact sheet and slide pack. So we will be happy to share those with you or anyone else you would like to distribute those to if you let us know. Again, it's the email address that's up there on your screen right now, stakeholder@airservicesaustralia.com. When we do send out materials from today, we'll also send you a link for a survey to give us some feedback about how you found it today and anything else you'd like to tell us about the webinars. So if you have time, we'd really appreciate it if you would fill that out for us. Okay, one last question. This would mean more departures at night over the sea rather than noisier over the city. Was that a question or more of a statement in regards to the discussion of nighttime?
So yeah, I guess in terms of a statement, the answer is yes, and that's certainly the preference from our point of view. Yeah.
Okay, great.
It is dependent still on those weather conditions, of course. Yeah.
Why was 5 knots, TWC, sorry, that's one for you, Richard, used as the standard to be applied, oh, tailwind? Why was 5 knots tailwind used as the standard to be applied during the late night period? Noisier aircraft can take up to 15 these days. Okay, so that's a clarification of the previous question, I take it.
Yeah, okay. So that's a regulatory requirement at this stage for us, and it is one that's under review. I won't say too much more than that. 5 knots, yes, we're well aware of aircraft capability, but 5 knots sits in the MOS at the moment, the manual standards that we operate to.
Anyone else? Looks like we're coming to the end of our session today, unless you have some more questions. While you're thinking about that, we do have a couple more webinars coming up in the coming weeks. We're just finalising presenter details and dates for those, but they will cover the lowering of Class E airspace in low density continental areas and also the upcoming trial at Ayers Rock. So we will let you know about those as we firm those details, and hopefully you will be able to join us. And again, please feel free to share the details with others in your networks if you have other people to pass them on to. Okay, I think in the absence of